Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling how humans developed language.
It really is one of those fundamental mysteries, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's
Yep.
almost like one of those puzzles where we've got, you know, a few pieces, but big chunks are missing.
Yeah.
But you know what? You, our listener, are here because you're clearly as curious about this as we are.
Yeah.
So to kind of guide our exploration today, we're going to be looking at the social interaction theory.
Okay.
And this is just one, perspective amongst many.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There are others like the gestural theory, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later in our deep dive.
Yeah.
But yeah, social interaction is a good one to start with.
Yeah. So to set the stage,
Mm-hmm.
I want to take us all the way back to the 19th century with good old Charles Darwin.
Okay.
Now, did you know that in his early notebooks, he's got all these observations about primate communication?
Yeah. He was convinced that if we wanted to understand the human mind, we needed to understand our closest evolutionary relatives.
Right.
And he was particularly intrigued by how primates use sound.
So he was really ahead of his time in seeing that connection between primates and us and how we communicate.
Yeah, and it's really about looking at the continuity of evolution
Yeah.
and sort of thinking, okay, so what are the building blocks that were already in place and how did they get modified over time?
Okay, so Darwin even proposed this idea of rudimentary song as like a potential precursor to language.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just, simple calls that we see with primates even today, but something a little more complex.
Yeah, well, what's really fascinating is that he actually drew parallels between this rudimentary song and the elaborate songs of birds.
Oh, interesting.
Like the nightingale or the mockingbird.
Right.
These species that have just incredibly diverse and intricate vocal repertoires.
So he's making that connection to say that the capacity for complex vocal communication maybe goes even way further back than just primates.
Yeah, that's right. And, his ideas were quite controversial at the time, but he boldly claimed, and I love this quote, "He who understands baboon would do more toward metaphysics than Locke."
Wow.
So he's basically saying that studying primate behavior is key to understanding the very nature of human thought,
Yeah.
including language.
So that really ties into that whole, social interaction and how that's shaping our brains.
Absolutely. And this brings us really to the heart of the social interaction theory.
Okay.
The core idea is that as our early human ancestors formed larger, more complex social groups,
Right.
the pressure to communicate effectively grew exponentially.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Think about it, all the things we use language for now.
Yeah.
Coordinating tasks, sharing information, expressing emotion.
Resolving conflict. Yeah.
Imagine trying to do any of that without language.
Well, exactly. I mean, you can almost think about it from the reverse perspective.
Okay.
Think about trying to organize a hunt or gather food without being able to communicate about where to go, what to look for, how to share the spoils.
Or even just trying to settle an argument with somebody
Yeah.
without language.
Yeah.
I mean, it would probably just devolve into just a lot of grunting and gesturing.
Yeah, a lot more fighting probably.
Yeah. And that's where improved vocal control would have been such a huge advantage.
Yeah. Individuals who could articulate their intentions, plans, emotions more clearly
Yeah.
would have been much more successful in these complex social environments.
So it's not just about making sounds, but it's about using those sounds in specific ways
Yeah.
for social purposes.
To achieve goals within a group.
Right. And that, according to the social interaction theory, is really what drove that whole evolution of language.
Precisely. Language emerged as a tool for navigating that increasingly complex social world.
But wasn't there more to early communication than just vocalizations? I mean, our sources mentioned something about mimesis.
Right. Mimesis.
What exactly is that, and how does that fit into all of this?
So mimesis is a fascinating concept. It refers to the use of gesture and imitation as a form of communication. So it's kind of like a pre-language communication system based on shared experiences and embodied actions.
So it's like our ancestors hanging out, trying to figure out, how to make a fire or crack open a nut or something. They're not just making sounds, they're showing each other.
Mm-hmm. Mimicking actions, expressing emotions through gestures.
And is there any evidence of that? I mean, obviously we don't have, recordings from back then, but do we see any remnants of this type of communication anywhere?
Well, actually, even our primate relatives exhibit a capacity for mimesis. Think about chimpanzees, for example.
Right.
They use a variety of gestures to communicate with each other, and they can even learn to imitate human actions.
So maybe mimesis was like a more primitive form of communication,
Yeah.
something that predates spoken language.
Yeah, potentially even laid the groundwork for its development.
But how do we go from there to like full-blown language?
That's a great question,
Uh-huh.
and one that requires us to delve into the cognitive underpinnings of language. And that's a conversation for our next segment.
Stay tuned.
So we were building up to this idea of how we transition from vocalization and mimesis to full-blown language as we know it.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. For most of human history, language existed only in the spoken form, right?
Right.
Like it was tied to the moment, to the reach of our voices.
Right.
But then, boom, we've got writing. And suddenly we can transmit information across time and space.
Yeah, it was a monumental leap in human cognitive development. No longer limited to those face-to-face interactions, we could record our thoughts, share knowledge across vast distances, build upon the wisdom of past generations.
It's like unlocking this whole other dimension of communication.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, from the sources we've been looking at, it wasn't just about finding a way to like visually represent spoken words.
Yeah.
It was a whole new way of thinking.
Absolutely. Remember how we were talking about mimesis being rooted in those concrete experiences?
Right.
Well, writing demanded a shift to a more abstract symbolic representation. We had to detach from those immediate experiences and create visual symbols that corresponded to the sounds of language.
Whoa, that's a big jump. And it makes me think about how many different writing systems humans have developed over time.
Oh, yeah.
You got hieroglyphs, you've got alphabets, you've got even emojis now.
Right.
All different ways to represent language.
Right. And they all represent different stages in that evolution of symbolic representation.
So from what I understand from our sources, there's kind of like 3 main modes of written language.
Okay.
Pictographic, ideographic, and phonological. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. So pictographic writing, that's the most basic form, where pictures directly represent objects or actions.
Okay.
So think cave paintings, those simple stick figures we all drew as kids.
Right.
Very literal visual representation.
Okay, so like a drawing of a sun to represent the sun.
Exactly.
Okay.
What about ideographic?
So ideographic writing gets a little more abstract.
Here, symbols represent ideas or concepts, not just specific objects. A great example is Chinese characters.
Right.
Each character embodies a whole concept, like love, justice, democracy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just like drawing a picture of something. It's actually like a symbol that captures a bigger idea.
Exactly. And then you have phonological writing.
And that's what we use in English?
That's what we use in English.
Sure.
So phonological writing, like our alphabet, uses symbols to represent the sounds of spoken language,
Okay.
which is incredibly flexible. You can combine a limited set of letters to create an almost infinite number of words and convey any idea that you can think of.
It's amazing how these different writing systems actually kind of mirror the evolution of human thought,
They do.
moving from those really concrete representations to more and more abstract and symbolic systems.
Absolutely. And here's something that might surprise you.
Okay.
Despite its profound impact, writing is a relatively recent invention in human history. It appeared only about 5,000 years ago.
Really? So for the vast majority of our existence as a species, we've relied solely on spoken language and mimesis.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
That really puts things in perspective.
It does, and it underscores just how revolutionary the development of writing was. It wasn't just a new way to communicate, it was a new way to think.
Yeah.
It enabled us to record history, to develop complex philosophical and scientific ideas,
Right.
and transmit knowledge across generations in a way that was never before possible.
I mean, it's no coincidence that the rise of civilizations happened right around the same time as writing emerged.
Yeah.
It's almost like
Wait.
writing provided the scaffolding for building those complex societies.
Exactly. But remember, while the social interaction theory provides this really compelling narrative for language development,
Yeah.
it's not the only perspective out there. You mentioned the gestural theory earlier.
Right. Yeah. Let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So the gestural theory proposes that our earliest forms of language were actually primarily gestural, not vocal.
That's right.
And it kind of emphasizes the importance of visual communication over sound.
Right.
And draws on those innate primate abilities for gesture and imitation that we talked about with mimesis.
Proponents of this theory often point to the fact that even our closest primate relatives, like chimpanzees, have surprisingly complex communication systems that are based on gesture. They use all these hand and body movements to convey intentions, warnings,
Right.
even to refer to objects in their environment.
So instead of focusing on the evolution of our vocal anatomy,
Yeah.
The gestural theory is suggesting that maybe the seeds of language were actually sown in the visual realm.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually some fascinating neurological evidence that supports this. Have you ever heard of mirror neurons?
Yeah. Aren't those the special brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we see somebody else doing that same action?
Exactly. It's
Right.
like our brains are literally wired for imitation. And some researchers believe that these mirror neurons played a crucial role in the development of language, particularly in those early gestural beginnings.
So it's not just about mimicking actions, but it's about understanding the meaning behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if gestures were so important, why did spoken language eventually become the dominant form of communication?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And researchers are still debating this.
Yeah.
One possibility is that as our ancestors began to use tools more extensively, their hands were occupied,
Oh, right.
making it more difficult to communicate through gestures alone.
That makes sense.
Also, spoken language has this advantage of being able to convey information over longer distances and in the dark,
Oh, yeah, of course.
which would have been beneficial for hunting and other activities.
Okay.
So, it might have been a combination of factors
Yeah.
that led to that dominance of spoken language. But it's fascinating to consider that our earliest forms of language
Yeah.
might have been more like a silent dance than a conversation.
Oh. It really challenges our assumptions
Yeah.
about what we think of as language
It does.
and where it came from. But, I mean, both the social interaction theory and the gestural theory seem to recognize this crucial role of, well, social interaction in driving language development.
Absolutely. Yeah, they just emphasize different aspects of that interaction. The social interaction theory focuses on those pressures of group living,
Right.
the need for coordination, while the gestural theory highlights the importance of that visual communication and the role of those mirror neurons in fostering a shared understanding.
Yeah, it's like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that even within these kind of broad theoretical frameworks, there's plenty of room for debate and nuanced perspectives.
It seems like the more we learn about the origins of language, the more complex and the more multifaceted the story becomes.
Yeah, it really is. And that's what makes it such a fascinating area of study. It's like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle. And with each new piece we uncover, we get a clearer picture of the intricate workings of the human mind.
But let's go back to that social interaction theory for a minute.
Okay.
Because I'm remembering something from our sources that talks about how language really helps us organize our lives,
Right.
especially when it comes to things like resource management or resolving conflicts. Like, can you give us some concrete examples of how language would have facilitated those really complex social interactions that were so important for early humans to survive?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine trying to coordinate a hunt without language.
Oh, yeah.
It would be incredibly difficult to share information about where the prey animals were located, to discuss strategies, to warn each other about potential dangers.
It would be a lot of like grunting and pointing and hoping that everybody gets the message.
Exactly. With language, our ancestors could communicate much more precisely,
Right.
which would have made those hunting expeditions far more efficient and successful.
Which, of course, means that they're more likely to, eat and survive.
Exactly. Being able to secure that reliable food supply would have been a major evolutionary advantage.
Okay, that makes sense. What about conflict resolution?
Yeah.
Because I can imagine things could get pretty tense when you've got, early humans trying to share resources or make decisions that affect the whole group.
Oh, absolutely. Without language, those disputes would likely escalate into physical confrontations,
Yeah.
potentially leading to injuries or even deaths within the group.
Yeah.
But with language, they could express their grievances, negotiate solutions,
Okay.
and ultimately maintain a more cohesive and cooperative social structure.
So language almost acted like a kind of social glue,
It did. Yeah.
helping to prevent those conflicts from tearing the group apart.
Exactly. And it's not just about resolving conflict, it's also about making those collective decisions.
Right.
Think about things like choosing where to migrate, how to divide resources,
Right.
or even just deciding what to do for the day.
I mean, without language, it would be chaos.
It would be chaos, yeah.
Everybody doing their own thing,
Yeah.
no way to coordinate or reach consensus.
Exactly. Language allows for discussion, debate,
Right.
and ultimately decision-making that benefits the group as a whole. It's the foundation of cooperation and collective action,
Right.
which are both essential for human survival and success.
It seems like language is just intertwined with pretty much every aspect of social life.
It is.
I mean, it's how we coordinate our actions, share knowledge, resolve those conflicts, make decisions. It's really hard to imagine human society as we know it without it.
I agree, and that's why the social interaction theory is so compelling.
Yeah.
It recognizes that language isn't just a tool for communication,
Right.
it's a fundamental part of what makes us human. It allowed our ancestors to build and maintain those complex social structures that enabled our species to thrive.
But are there any other theories about the origin of language that we haven't touched on? Or
Oh,
any,
well,
like, alternative perspectives within these theories?
Oh, absolutely. The world of language origin theories is a rich and diverse one. For example, some researchers have proposed that music might have played a role
Oh,
in
wow.
the development of language.
Okay.
They point to the fact that both music and language involve those complex patterns of sound, rhythm,
Right.
and that both can evoke powerful emotions and social connections. So they're seeing music as a kind of proto-language, a stepping stone on that path to full-blown linguistic complexity.
That's fascinating.
And there are other theories that focus on the role of ritual and storytelling in the emergence of language.
Okay.
The idea is that these shared experiences, often accompanied by gestures and vocalizations, might have helped to create a sense of community and shared meaning,
Right.
paving the way for those more complex forms of communication.
So it seems like there's no shortage of ideas when
Yeah.
it comes to how language might have emerged.
No shortage at all, and that's what makes it such a fascinating and enduring mystery. It's a question that has really intrigued philosophers, linguists, and anthropologists for centuries,
Yeah.
and it continues to spark debate and new discoveries even to this day.
It's like a never-ending detective story, with clues scattered across different disciplines and new pieces of the puzzle emerging all the time.
Exactly. And speaking of clues and puzzles, there's one more piece of this social interaction theory puzzle that I think is worth exploring a little bit further. It has to do with those specific cognitive abilities that language requires,
Okay.
and how those abilities might have evolved in response to the social demands of our ancestors. But that's a conversation for our final segment.
Okay. I can't wait to hear more about the cognitive underpinnings of language and how they might have been shaped by our ancestors' social world. The processing sounds, assigning meaning to words, understanding all the grammar and syntax, inferring, intentions and emotions.
All happening simultaneously.
Yeah. And all in milliseconds.
Effortlessly. Yeah, it's a testament to the power and flexibility of the human brain.
It really is.
Yeah.
But how did our brains become so good at language?
Hmm.
I mean, was it just a lucky accident of evolution?
Right.
Or was there something about our ancestors' social lives that specifically selected for those language-related abilities?
Well, the social interaction theory argues that there was indeed a very strong selective pressure
Okay.
for those language-related cognitive abilities. Remember how we talked about the importance of coordination, cooperation, conflict resolution?
Right, those are key for survival.
Exactly. And to navigate those complex social landscapes, our ancestors needed more than just the ability to make sounds
Yeah.
or even to mimic gestures. They needed a whole suite of cognitive tools that allowed them to understand and manipulate abstract symbols, to keep track of social relationships, to predict and interpret the intentions and emotions of others.
I'm starting to see the connection here.
Mhm.
So you're saying that these cognitive abilities evolved specifically because they were so advantageous in social contexts.
Precisely. For example, one crucial cognitive ability for language is something called theory of mind.
Okay. Theory of mind. What's that?
So theory of mind is the ability to understand that other people have their own thoughts, beliefs, and intentions,
Okay.
which may be different from our own. It's what allows us to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes
Right.
and to anticipate how they might react in a given situation.
Oh, so it's like having a built-in mind reader.
Yeah, exactly. And research suggests that theory of mind is actually very closely linked to language development.
Okay.
Children who have developed a strong theory of mind tend to be much better at understanding language, particularly those nuances of social communication.
That makes sense. If you don't know what someone else is thinking or feeling, it's going to be pretty hard to have a conversation with them.
Exactly. And there are other cognitive abilities that are thought to have co-evolved with language, like working memory,
Okay.
which allows us to hold multiple pieces of information in mind at the same time, and executive function,
Right.
which helps us to plan, organize, and control our impulses.
So it's not just about, being able to produce and understand words. It's about having the mental capacity to engage in those complex social interactions, to negotiate meaning and to build relationships.
Exactly. And the social interaction theory suggests that these cognitive abilities were really honed and refined over generations,
Okay.
driven by those social demands of our ancestors' lives.
It's a pretty cool perspective.
Mm.
It suggests that language isn't just a tool for communication,
Mm.
but it's a reflection of our deep-seated social nature,
Yeah,
a testament to the power of human connection and collaboration.
absolutely. And it's a journey that continues to this day, as our social worlds evolve.
Yeah.
So, too does our language. Think about how technology has influenced the way we communicate.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
New forms of language are emerging online and in digital spaces.
Yeah. Emojis, internet slang, even the way we write text messages.
It's all evidence that language is a living, breathing entity, constantly adapting to those changing social needs.
Well, that brings us to a final thought-provoking question, I think, for you, our listener. If language is so deeply intertwined with our social nature,
Yeah.
what does the future of language hold as our social interactions continue to evolve in this increasingly interconnected world?
It is a question worth pondering.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the origins of language, we encourage you to continue exploring the theories we discussed,
Yeah.
to delve deeper into the research, and to keep marveling at the power and mystery of this uniquely human ability.
Because ultimately, understanding language is about understanding ourselves, our origins, and the remarkable journey that has brought us to where we are today.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, keep those minds curious, and keep exploring the intricate tapestry of human communication.